Once upon a time, long, long ago, there existed a book. One which detailed the exploits of a valiant hero whose silly, wacky, stretchy abilities helped liberate people from their suffering by delivering laughter to their faces. This is the story of a man named Joy Boy, the laugh tale they call One Piece.
この物語はフィクションである。貴君の現実に存在する人物、思想、事象とは無関係だ。
Wealth, fame, power, everything in this world can be attained, and yet some would see this not as a bounty to be shared, but as a resource to monopolize. It is this very greed that led our world into the deep darkness of a long night it yet sleeps in. Over a millennia ago, our world lay divided and fragmented, torn asunder by struggle and inequality. Despite the many varied races that inhabited it, there was one that possessed the strongest advantage there can be: numbers. And so the humans took advantage of their numbers to take hold of power and make them the dominating species of the planet. Yet even among them, they found ways to divide each other, until some clutched the power at the top, while all others suffered beneath them. Peoples of other races, peasants, and prisoners had no choice but to escape, yet those who could not, like the Tontatta, fell to slavery, treated as nothing more than tools to fuel the wealth and power of the human kings who stood at the top. So horrible were the deeds of these kings that those who suffered under them began referring to the cruel tyrants with the moniker of devils. Some fled to the seabed below, some on unreachable peaks, but others took to the skies. Folk who had been blessed with wings, which some called angels, fled the troubled lands of the world below for the celestial body that is the moon, where they developed a civilization that could remain undisturbed by the troubles below. This was the moon capital of Burka, where the angels were able to quickly develop and generate industrialization, reaching a technology far more advanced than anything that came prior. However, in their quest for science, they came upon a critical problem. Creation of energy required the primal source, fire. But to achieve fire, natural resources were needed, the likes of which were simply not available on the barren wasteland that was the moon. As such, left with a lack of resources to propel their technology, the angels of the moon had no other choice but to return to the blue planet below to further their research. Once descended over time, the angels split into tribes in search of different places to inhabit across the seas. Some of them discovered how to use their scientific prowess to alter the density of a substance known as spiral blowing, allowing them to turn clouds into solid land, sky islands, on which some of them settled upon to keep away from the humans. However, another subset of angels decided to locate themselves somewhere else entirely, but still somewhere high above the tides and far away from humans. They built their settlement atop the Red Wall, the titanic continent surrounding the World Tree that was known as the Sun Tree Eve, whose length spanned the entire Red Wall all the way from the sunlight at the top to the roots where Fishman Island lay. This tree brought bountiful nature along with it, providing a veritable Garden of Eden atop the Red Wall, providing natural resources that could develop the technology of the angels even further. Their quest for knowledge advanced, until one day a certain scientist made a groundbreaking discovery, one that would have veritably changed the history of the world. They realized the existence of the bloodline elements, a genetic code that exists within all living beings, essentially the blueprints of life. If potentially the angels could find a way to modify the bloodline elements through genetic alterations, then they could quite possibly allow their people to evolve far beyond any other creature. It was very nearly a step into the realm of godhood. And so they eventually did, learning how to bend and alter the bloodline elements of their future children to allow their descendants to slowly evolve into genetically superior creatures. They made their skin as tough as steel, attaining a dark color to the point that normal attacks could not harm them. They gained massive black wings that, unlike other angels, actually allowed them to soar through the skies. They gained pure white hair and red eyes, a symbol of strength and unbridled power. And most importantly of all, they gained the ability to self-ignite and generate flames with their bodies. Through this self-ignition, they could circumvent the biggest hurdle that impeded their advancement of science. They essentially now had an unlimited resource at hand, an undying flame allowing them to power all of their technology without limits. Through these advancements, these angels became the strongest form of humanity in all the history of the sea, genetically superior creatures. People began to call them the Lunaria, those who brought blessings from the moon, and due to their lack of understanding of this technology, many people created legends around them, treating them like heavenly beings who had descended from the heavens to the planet below to bring judgment upon the greedy humans. People began to venerate them as gods, be it out of admiration or fear, and the settlement they had built atop the Red Wall came to be known as the God Country. But despite their unprecedented might, the Lunaria could not yet circumvent the issue of numbers. While their strength was enough to drive invaders away from their home, it was not enough to protect others beyond their kin. And such power in their hands helped nothing but to attract the envy of many. However, this is where our story would take a critical turning point, as the protagonist of this tale would finally take the stage. The titular protagonist of our story was a young boy of no particular remark who was simply known by the name of Nika, but he was a boy of lofty ambitions who had a grand dream he wanted to accomplish. Story goes that to make this dream a reality, he had set to sea as a pirate in search of freedom, and in his travels he made steadfast friends with people all around the world, adding new members to his crew and forming strong bonds with kingdoms all across, no matter who they were. You see, Nika was an odd fellow, for he did not care what his friends looked or were like, and instead wished to be friends with people from the entire world. In his grand adventure, he challenged and took down many of the tyrants that oppressed the lands he visited to bring liberation to everyone, taking all the wealth, fame, and power he attained it, not for himself, but to share it with all. Onlookers would remain stunned at Nika's ridiculously wild and stretchy powers, yet the sight of them could not help but bring laughter to their faces. Wherever he went, whichever civilization he touched, Nika would always bring cheer and joy with him, to the point he came to be known by the nickname of Joy Boy. He loved partying and music, singing a certain song that he always loved, beating to the rhythm of his drums, to the point that his infectious joy and optimism endeared all those who heard of him. Nika indeed had lofty ambitions. The boy did not just attain to attain complete freedom, but he wanted to also share that liberation to all people of the world, and he believed that he could put an end to all the pain, strife, conflict, and suffering if he only could make his ultimate dream a reality. To throw the biggest party in the world, a party with the entire world, and thus to connect everyone, as he himself always put it, into one piece. Nika believed that if he could get the entire world's population to dance, sing, and laugh together to the rhythm of his funny song, such joy could connect them in a bond of friendship and brotherhood that will help them put their differences aside. Those who heard and read of his tales and exploits simply laughed at his dream, deeming it nothing more than a childish fantasy and a ridiculous ideal, and yet the pure heart behind this ideal and message, legitimately believing that such a dream could bring an end to all the strife and division that plagued the world, inspired all those who heard of it to the point that they actually wanted to make Nika's dream a reality. So powerful was the message of Joy Boy's story that several kingdoms and countries all across the world came together and pledged an allegiance to make Nika's vision become reality. All these different races, kingdoms, and countries came together to form a single power, an immense kingdom that quite verbally stretched across the entire world. This kingdom was immense, but not in a sense that it was physically big, but that its allies were people scattered and spread all over the world. A kingdom of pirates that wanted to connect the whole world into one piece by making the ideals of the one who had inspired them, Nika, a reality. Inspired by the figure of Nika, the peoples that formed the immense kingdom began to lend their help to each other, and chief among those allies were the Lunaria of the God Country, who pledged to make use of their advanced technology to aid their friends. One of those allies was the Kolsky clan of the Wano country, who suffered in their nation under the current ruling emperor, the Ethan Baron family, who commanded Wano with an iron grip to the suffering of its inhabitants. However, with the help of all their allies, the Kolsky clan were able to bring liberation to the Wano country, driving the Ethan Baron family away and establishing a shogunate that would ensure the country's citizens could lead free lives. News of this conflict terrorized the devil tyrants across the world, for they feared that people would keep rebelling and then their heads may be next. However, though the people of the God Country had been assisting their allies with their technology, they ran into a considerable issue, being that without their perennial flames native to their tribe, their allies could not power any of their machinery. Genetically augmenting other races would take too long of a process, so they tried to replicate these effects in a faster way by creating a drug they called energy steroids, which could allow others to attain the strength of the Lunaria in a short period of time, attaining the same white hair and red eyes. However, this drug backfired as it caused the genetic code of the user to evolve too quickly, resulting in rapid aging, so the project was quickly discarded and all the energy steroids were sealed within the Tamatebako box, which the Ryugu kingdom hid away as its national treasure to ensure that none would suffer its effects again. A more successful application of this was helping the minks attain their Sulang forms, which similarly gave them white hair and red eyes thanks to the power of the Lunaria's homeland, the moon, but this could only be sustained by brief periods of time. It is then, however, that a certain person emerged to offer the Lunaria a proposition, a way to accelerate the evolution of people in a far faster and more immediate way. This person was the king of the Nerona family, one of the ruling human kings at the time, who was different from the other devils, instead wanting to assist the people of the God Country into making their dreams reality. This king had an incredible touch with dealing with plants and nature, and thus suggested to make use of the photosynthetic abilities of the Sun Tree Eve to concentrate the extracts of bloodline elements. And through what appeared like nothing short of witchcraft, King Nironaimu was able to apply this technology to make the Eve tree give birth to fruits that contain boundless genetic possibilities, allowing for immediate evolution upon but a single bite. This creation was a truly unparalleled feat, one that would bring an even higher unprecedented age of prosperity for the people of the God Country and their allies, earning Imu's trust as one of their closest allies. So incredible was Imu's control over nature and irrigation that some began to call them the Mother of Nature, the sea Umi. However, the Lunaria eventually came to a much simpler solution for their issue of powering their technology that didn't even require the use of these fruits, to instead use the endless energy that is found all over the world. They discovered the key to solar power and solar fusion, allowing all of their creations to be infinitely powered simply through the energy of the sun. If further developed, then this technology and its wealth could then potentially be distributed across the whole world, allowing to put an end to any war for resources, leading to true world peace. The sun was far more than just a source of power. It was a symbol for the people of the kingdom. They felt that the world had been steeped in a long and dark night, a darkness spread by the devils and tyrants ruling it, and so they wanted to upturn the current corrupt system upside down and instead bring a new dawn onto this night, one that would bask all races in its warmth and allow them to live under the same sun. Thus, they began to refer to the day when they could make Nika's dreams a reality, the Day of Promise, as the day the world would be turned upside down, and the new era that would come with it as the dawn of the world. With their objective clear in sight, they understood clearly the name they wished to give their newfound alliance. They would call it the Kingdom of D, the Kingdom of Dawn. The sun itself became the mark of the Kingdom of Dawn, and became used by all of its allies as a symbol of union and equality under the same sun, to symbolize the ideal of building a world that was truly connected together. The tales of Nika's adventures spread far and wide, with his exploits of defeating tyrannical rulers reaching the ears of many across the world, including those of all slaves and prisoners who were oppressed. They all began to pray to Nika, begging him to deliver them liberation from their suffering. They venerated him like he was a god, he who led the gods of the God Country to bring liberation and unite all people under the same sun, the sun god Nika. With wind on their sails, those of the Kingdom of Dawn wished to proceed with making Nika's dream a reality. They wanted to do away with the borders that kept the world divided. More specifically, their goal was to destroy the Red Line and the Grand Line, and to unite all the seas of the world into one piece, which would restore the sea that was lost to legends, the All Blue. The objective of these people was to bring the destruction of the world, but not in a negative sense, rather to destroy these barriers isolating the world, to make it truly free and united, to allow people to freely sail across all the seas, and thus to allow people from all over the world to come to Nika's party. The people of Fishman Island and the God Country would lose their homes in the process, but they forged a promise that they would rebuild new settlements on the surface together for all to live united under the same sun. But to achieve such a world-destroying feat would require mighty power, and so the kingdom put to use their peerless technology and combined prowess with their allies, the shipwrights of Water 7, to build 3 colossal ships that would serve as weapons to destroy these barriers. These ships were each assigned a champion to command them, whom, blessed by the power of the voice of all things, a mystical advanced form of observation haki they were able to develop, would have the ability to command enormous creatures that would assist them in commanding these ships. So mighty were their powers that people christened them with the names of gods as well. First was the shogun from the Kosuke family of the Wano country, who, through the voice of all things, could command the colossal elephant Zunisha. He was given possession of a gigantic battleship with the power set to wipe out an entire island in one blast, hidden away beneath Wano for safekeeping. For this position, he inherited the name of the god Pluton. Second was Imu, the ruler of the Nerona family, and the one people now called Umi for their creation of the fruits. Imu had the power to command a titanic flying dragon with the voice of all things, and was able to thus lead a colossal starship with the power to wipe out an island in one blast. For this power, on top of their title as Mother of the Sea, they were also christened as the god Uranus. And third was the mermaid princess of the Neptune family from the Ryugu kingdom. She had the authority to command all sea kings, but her ship, the Ark Noah, was not built with the capability of destruction. Rather, it was built to help emigrate the people of Fishman Island to the surface, as when the Red Line would be destroyed, unavoidably the rubble would destroy the island beneath it. And this was a sacrifice the sea folk were willing to make, so the people of the God Country forged a promise with them that would make their dream to coexist with humans a reality. The princess thus took her role as the god Poseidon. At last, the people of the God Country were within reach of achieving their dreams. However, right at the 11th hour, when everything seemed within grasp, betrayal struck. For some reason, the users of the fruits had found themselves completely paralyzed when in contact with water. At first, they thought this had to be some side effect, but some could not help but fear, what if it had been intentional all along? Since Imu was considered by some the sea incarnate with control over water, how come all other users were weak to it? Alas, the horrible truth was apparent. Secretly this whole time, Imu despised all those who ate the fruits, as they loathed and envied the people of the God Country, wishing the power and haven they had attained all for themselves. So in secret, Imu had been hatching a plan all along. They created these fruits to cripple the people of the Kingdom of Dawn, to make them all weak to their powers as the sea, but in the process earning their trust to become the commander of the ancient weapon Uranus. Furthermore, Imu had been secretly scheming with the rulers of another 19 human kingdoms to stage an alliance against the God Country, in a gambit to usurp their power and achieve their ultimate dream of becoming the king of the world. Offering them to make them gods just like those of the God Country, Imu rallied their 19 devils under them and blessed them with the name of Celestial Dragons, in honor of the dragons Imu could command. The people of the world quickly realized that Imu was far from a god. In fact, they were the very devil itself, just like the devils of those human kingdoms, to the point Imu came to be known as the Devil of the Sea. And so the cursed fruits they had created came to be known as the Devil Fruits, those created by the human devils who wished to control the world. Naive and trusting, the residents of this Garden of Eden, the God Country, had bitten into the forbidden fruits of the devil fruit tree Eve, tempted by the devil and falling into its trap. Driven by their greed, King Imu attained boundless power, consuming their body and mind to turn them into a monster beyond any imagination. The fears and doubts of people had taken form incarnate into this horrifying creature, becoming people's worst nightmare, giving start to a conflict for survival known as the War of Liberation. Pincered in such a Machiavellic plan, the people of the God Country were at an unavoidable disadvantage. Their devil-fruit users could not stand up to Imu's powers as the sea, and the humans had the advantage of numbers as well, not to mention an ancient weapon on their side. It was evident there was no time to lose, and so the kingdom's allies moved to unleash their plan into action and bring forth the destruction of the world by destroying the Red Line and the Grand Line. However, one of their allies refused to act. Despite Pluton's orders to Zunisha, who was imperial in the plans of bringing forth the destruction of the world, the elephant was terrified by the thought of unleashing such a weapon that could destroy the entire planet. He was afraid that if these powers were used in the wrong way, they could quite literally bring death to all. This would prove catastrophic, as without Zunisha, the destruction of the world could not be made a reality, as Imu possessed the other Red Line destroying weapon, and thus the dawn of the world could not be brought. This grave crime committed by Zunisha, though bearing good intentions, would spell a critical turning point in the War of Liberation. Followingly, the Mermaid Princess was killed in conflict, and at that point the kingdom understood very well the future that would await them. It was clear that the war would be lost in due time. Their chances of succeeding were slim at best, and without the three weapons by their side, the dawn of the world could not become a reality. However, legend says that these powers with the voice of all things are inherited every 800 years, so if they waited for 8 centuries again into the future, then perhaps someone could inherit these dreams and arise to lead these ancient weapons to finally destroy the world and liberate it from its tyrants. It would be a long and dark night, enveloped in the darkness under the devil's rule, but if the world could persist until then perhaps the dawn of the world could truly become a reality, and perhaps a Joy Boy may even finally appear upon this world. However, as a wise man once said, people only die when they are forgotten. So if the ideals of the Kingdom of Dawn came to be completely erased and forgotten, then the possibility of someone inheriting them would become nigh impossible. The Sea Devil would thus no doubt attempt everything to erase their existence by wiping out all traces of information about the kingdom's history, so for that reason they devised a contingency plan. They received assistance from the world-class stonemasons of the Koski clan, as thanks for having helped them liberate their country in their time, to carve down all the important information of their history onto indestructible stones. These monoliths, dubbed poneglyphs, would include information about the kingdom's ideals, the history of their kingdom, their ultimate goal of destroying the world, how to achieve that through the use of the 3 weapons, and finally, 4 red stones that would point to the nexus of their kingdom, the God Country, where they would leave behind Joy Boy's story and the truth of the world in hopes it could inspire a future generation to change the world in their place. And as a final move, the people of the Kingdom of Dawn would begin to hide their name in the form of the initials they would bear, keeping them hidden until the day when fate would begin to move its gears. True enough, the Sea Devil tried to seize these stones to ensure that no traces of their information would remain, but one of the other 20 kings, Queen of Alabasta Nefertari Lili, allowed for their dispersion across the world, which earned Imu's ire. Lili pretended this was an error on her behalf, but in truth she had been double-crossing Imu, allowing the poneglyphs to be scattered so they could someday help bring the dawn. As after all, so did Alabasta bear the symbol of the sun in their flag. Thanks to Lili's help, the poneglyphs were scattered to all allies of the kingdom to ensure their protection. Imu attempted to retrieve them, starting by assailing the city of Shandora on Jaya. The people of Shandora proudly defended their land in a grueling battle, which resulted in the destruction of their city and the death of many of their people, losing a lot of the technology they brought from the moon in the process, regressing to a more primitive state. Yet in spite of this, they were able to stand their ground and defend the poneglyph, and Imu's forces had to give up on their efforts to seize it. To declare their pride, the Shandorans built a giant golden bell, hoping that their fallen comrades could hear them even from the heavens above, to relight the light of their city and the light of the dawn. Imu instead set their sights onto the Wano country, as it was found in possession of an ancient weapon, several poneglyphs, and the clan who carved them. The former Emperor Nasuzuro, who joined as one of the 19 kings that served Imu, asked for assistance in reclaiming their territory as well. However, the people of the Wano country had erected colossal walls around the country's borders to protect it from outsiders, and Shogun Kolski enacted an isolationist policy to ensure that none would be able to enter the country and take control of either their poneglyphs or the ancient Pluton battleship, which is what made the Wano country special. This made it impossible to sail the country by sea. Imu could instead only make use of the colossal dragon they were able to command as Uranus to lay waste to the island. The dragon descended from the heavens, bringing chaos to the capital. However, a heroic green-haired, one-eyed samurai by the name of Shimotsuki Ryuma stood guard to protect his homeland. During a legendary duel that would go down in history, Ryuma swiftly decapitated the dragon over the skies of the capital of Wano, proving to the world that none should mess with its samurai, forcing the human forces to back off and leave the country alone. This legendary duel would become myth, and the dragon from said myth would in due time become a mythological fruit as well, one that Imu would eventually seize again, one day to be eaten by someone else in the distant future. However, Shogun Kosuke was not done, as he condemned Zunisha's grave crime, ordering the elephant to walk across the oceans for the next 100 years, waiting until the day of promise would arrive, to then return to Wano and open the borders of the country to unleash Pluton upon the world, this time for good. In addition, Zunisha would shelter the Ming tribe on its back alongside a road poneglyph, which gave birth to the Mokomo Dukedom, a duchy subservient to the Kosuke shogunate. Thankful for being given a home after the war, the Ming swore gratitude in a pact of brotherhood with the Kosuke clan, promising to assist them in the future whenever they may need it, to never betray them or sell them out. However, Amatsuki Toki, the daughter of one of the kingdom's allies and citizen of Wano born abroad during the war, found herself stranded far at sea. Terrified by the outcome of the conflict and hoping to see the dawn of the world with her own eyes, she used the devil fruit powers of her Toki Toki no Mi she had eaten, which her parents had named after her, to leap 800 years into the future, to the day where she could hopefully bear witness when the world would be turned upside down. Other allies of the kingdom, such as the people of Burka or Elbaf, would follow similar isolationist policies, becoming fierce warriors to protect their lands in order to ensure their poneglyphs would not be stolen. Regardless, the 18 remaining kings, alongside Imu, seized the spoils of war and ascended to the top of the Red Line, where they brought destruction to the god country and built over it their new realm of the gods. The god land Marijua, or when translated, literally the Lady of the Sea, referring to Imu directly. The so-called celestial dragons formed a world government that would rewrite history and erase the image of devils that became associated with them, by reversing the roles they were given prior. They now made it clear to the world that they were the new gods who created this world, whereas instead the clan that bore the D name were treated by the government as devils, their natural enemies, claiming that the three weapons the ancient kingdom used were destructive tools used to try and destroy the world. However, for this narrative to be sustained, he would have to ensure that their existence as one of the weapons would remain unknown, and to avoid any others having any thoughts about bringing revolution, Himo realized it would be easier to control people if they never knew that they existed in the first place. So rather than erase their past as the Sea Devil and now to be known as a god of the world, Himo instead preferred to vanish from history altogether, and to control the world from the shadows. As such, the celestial dragons pledged their 19 swords upon the empty throne, Imu included, to trick the world into thinking that there was no king, while Imu, alongside their 5 closest commanders, used the Ope Ope no Mi to attain perennial youth and rule the world forevermore. The story of the legendary clash of ideals between the sun god Nika and the devil of the sea became nothing more than legend, and that legend became a myth. But as is the case with all mythologies, they all eventually bear fruit to a mythological zoan. The myth of Nika's existence came to take form under a special mythological type fruit, the Hitoito no Mi model Nika. There were those who wished for Nika's existence, and no matter how much the government tried to raise it, people would always yearn and dream for someone like Nika to save them. Inherited will, people's dreams, and the swell of an era, no matter how much they may attempt to erase them, these things will never cease to be, and all things that are dreamed of are born upon this world. But the same can be said for the other side of the coin. But you see, zone fruits were created with a defect. Due to the overwhelming amount of animal genetic code within them, some of them began to possess a will of their own, and so these fruits would use their will to continuously evade the world government for 800 years, until they would one day find someone suitable enough to take their powers and make their dreams become reality. It's for that very purpose that the people of the Kingdom of Dawn left behind an unbelievable treasure. treasure, and that treasure is exactly everything you've just experienced up until now, the very embodiment of all this lost history. For everything I have just told you, who is to say that it is truth or fiction? Who is to say that the adventures of this rubbery boy are the true history of this world, or nothing more than a funny story to make people laugh? Whatever they may be, there is no denying that this treasure is nothing short of the greatest story ever told, a laugh tale truly capable of uniting the entire world as one piece. To understand the truth of the Void Century and the One Piece treasure itself, we really need to better understand who Imu really is. So let's start with the basics and outline what we know for a fact. As Ivankov inferred, Imu is almost certainly one of the original 20 founding members of the world government, a king from a certain country once ruled by the Nerona family. This Saint Nerona led the other 19 kings in defeating the people of the ancient kingdom, and used the Ope Ope no Mi to attain perennial youth and take control of the world. However, Ivankov also likely speculated that Imu was connected to one of the ancient weapons, as Imu's power to wipe out an entire island in one attack is the exact same description that Crocodile attributed to one of the other ancient weapons, since we've been told that only they can possess such world-destroying power. But how could Imu be an ancient weapon? Well, once you think about it, suddenly a very clear pattern begins to emerge. If what destroyed Lelouch was a flying weapon, then it basically would have to have been a flying saucer, a UFO, or more simply, a flying ship. To clarify, while it was said that Vegapunk created the Mother Flame, the way it's been referred to in the Japanese version seems to indicate the idea that the Mother Flame is the power source behind the weapon rather than the weapon itself. It's likely that the actual weapon is a flying ship, as we mentioned, that likely existed since the Void Century, while the Mother Flame is the energy source that powers it, meaning that Imu likely had possession of the weapon but needed Vegapunk's energy cells to power it. As Ivankov explained, this was most likely an ancient weapon connected to Imu, which would be the flying ship that we mentioned, the dark object that Sabo and the others saw flying in the sky. But when you think about it, it's not the only weapon that is a ship, as Pluton was also said to be a battleship hidden underneath Wano. But wait, the other ancient weapon, Poseidon, also involves a giant ship, the Ark Noah. So what if all three weapons are actually giant ships, all meant to fulfill the same grand purpose? But wait, hold on, Archer, you might say. Isn't Shirahoshi considered to be the ancient weapon Poseidon? Well, yes, but we may be looking this at the wrong way. Maybe it's not that all the ancient weapons are people or all the ancient weapons are ships. What if each ancient weapon isn't a singular entity, but rather is formed by three different components: a colossal ship, a person who can put it to use, and the giant creatures that said person can control? Think about it. For example, with Poseidon we have Shirahoshi, who has the power to command the Sea Kings through the voice of all things. Those Sea Kings are then the only things that can move the colossal Ark Noah, fulfilling their purpose. Similarly, Pluton is a battleship that is hidden beneath Wano, but the only way to unleash this weapon is by quite literally physically opening the borders of the Wano country, which we have been told can only be achieved by Zunisha. Zunisha came to Wano to open its borders upon Joyboy's return, but Momonosuke told it to wait until they were better prepared to face the government. Since Momonosuke is the only person that can command Zunisha, doing it also through the voice of all things just like Shirahoshi, it would make Momonosuke the champion of Pluton, and Zunisha, the beast he commands, being the only creature that can unleash the battleship Pluton upon the world. Even Yamato had told Momonosuke that according to Oden's journal, after he found out about the truth of the ancient weapons, he realized that Momonosuke was essential to fulfilling the purpose of the weapons, that of bringing the dawn of the world, for which he had to survive at all costs. Something that can only mean that Momonosuke is one of the three ancient weapons, being the human counterpart of Pluton, who can command Zunisha just like Shirahoshi, and is the only one that can unleash the battleship Pluton upon the world. So finally, perhaps Imu is the champion who, through commanding some giant large creature, can unleash the starship Uranus upon the world. But if that is the case, what is the giant creature that Imu could command? While Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus are all named after gods, specifically the trinity of gods from Greco-Roman mythology that rule over the three planes: the underworld, the sea, and the skies. This is reflected in the three ancient weapons, as Pluton is hidden in the underworld of Wano, Poseidon is hidden in the seas, and Ymir is located in the skies atop the red line. And similarly, elephants are land creatures, sea kings are water creatures, so what are giant creatures that fly through the skies? Dragons are sacred to the world government. After all, their very gods are literally called the celestial dragons. Though if we translate from Japanese more literally, the kanji used for celestial dragons is actually the same used for the planet Uranus in Japanese. And this is no coincidence, as the Sea Kings also used the exact same kanji used for the Japanese name for the planet Poseidon. It was even mentioned that the celestial dragons had ordered Vegapunk to artificially recreate dragons, the ones we saw in Punk Hazard, and likely were also those who requested they replicate Kaida's fruit, which was eventually eaten by Momonosuke, likely due to their adoration of the dragons Imu once controlled, which is why Imu blessed 19 champions with the title of Celestial Dragons, or literally Uranus Dragons even if you want to be more literal. Dragons are currently considered mythological creatures as they have all gone extinct, but we can prove their historical existence through a famous dragon of legend, the one from the tale of the samurai Ryuma. According to legend, during a time when the recently founded government tried to seize control of the Wano country, a dragon was sent to take the land. This was likely right after the end of the Void Century, as with the giant barriers erected around the country, it would have been impossible to enter the country via any means but the skies. So it would make sense that Imu sent the dragon to evade from above, but as the story tells, Ryuma stood guard to protect his homeland from the invaders, and in a legendary duel, Ryuma slayed the dragon over the capital of Wano, proving to the government that their country would remain free. Thus, this dragon vanished from the Void Century and became myth, but every myth becomes a mythological fruit, and thus that took the form of the Uowonomi Model Seiryu, which the celestial dragons then kept safe. That would be until Kaido ate the fruit when Big Mom raided it from the island in the God Valley incident, and in an ironic twist of fate, Kaido would return to retake the Wano country, just as Imu tried to so many years before. This would perfectly explain everything, except there's one thing that doesn't add up. As we were told, the ancient weapons were meant to be used by the ancient kingdom to help bring good to the world. And this makes sense, as after all, the Mother Flame would have been impossible to build without the advanced technology of the kingdom. As Rocinante once explained to us, the D-clan are considered the natural enemies of the gods, the celestial dragons, something that Imo later confirmed, stating that the D-clan were the people of the ancient kingdom who opposed the 20 kings of the Void Century. And as Rocinante elaborated, the purpose of the D-clan, the people of the ancient kingdom, is to bring the destruction of the world, but as he clarified, not a destruction meant in a negative sense like someone like Doflamingo or Imo would intend it, but a destruction that could bring good to the world. And we've constantly been told across the series that the ancient weapons will bring destruction to the world, which likely refers to the destruction of the Red Line and the Grand Line for the sake of uniting the entire world as one sea, literally one piece, the All Blue. This is the purpose that the three ships of the ancient weapons serve. Pluton and Uranus, capable of destroying islands in one blast, could be the only thing capable of blowing up the Red Line. Its destruction would cause the collapse of Fishman Island below it, fulfilling the prophecy of Luffy destroying the island that Charlie foresaw, but to aid that, Poseidon's arc will help the people of Fishman Island emigrate to the surface where they can coexist with humans, which is the promise that was made with the people of Fishman Island so long ago. So here's the thing that doesn't add up. Why would Imu, one of the 20 kings that opposed the ancient kingdom, be the champion of one of the ancient weapons of the kingdom that were meant to change the world for good? Well, the answer is fairly simple. It must mean that Imu was originally part of this ancient kingdom, but eventually betrayed them. And the key to all this lies specifically in the names of the three ancient weapons, as not only are Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus the name of three ancient gods, but also the names of the final three planets of our celestial system. And what are the names of the other planets? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter, the names of the Gorosei, or when translated from Japanese, literally the 5 elder planets. The 5 elder planets are the only planets of our solar system that were observable prior to the invention of modern telescopes, but during that time it was believed that planets revolved around the Earth. The likes of Galileo Galilei tried disproving this by demonstrating that the Earth revolved around the Sun alongside the other planets, but as the Earth, being the center of the universe, served a sense of importance to monarchs and the Church, such belief was kept as law for many centuries. Thus, this model of planets revolving around the Earth, known as geocentrism, has become a symbol for propaganda and false history, whereas instead all planets revolving around the Sun alongside the other planets is a symbol for the scientific truth. So in this case, the Sun would obviously be the figure of the sun god Nika, and by comparison, in this scheme, the figure of the Earth may be Imu themselves, with the 5 elder planets all orbiting around them, and the ancient weapons removed from this scheme. And if we follow the Greco-Roman gods after which the Gorosei are named after, the god for the Earth would be Gaia, the mother of nature, which has an equivalent in the One Piece world, being the mother of nature. Umi, the embodiment of the sea, stated to be the one that punished Alfred users to drown in water, which suddenly would make a lot of sense, as it would explain why Imu is just Umi backwards, or even why their residence is called Marijua, as that translates to Lady of the Sea. Even the term Pangea, or as it is more correctly pronounced, Pangaea, is derived from Gaia, the goddess that is Mother Nature herself in Greek mythology, and embodies the earth. But Dalford users drowning in water is an inherent nature built within the Dalfords themselves, an actual flaw of the genetic code they provide, meaning that only the one who created the Dalfruits could be the one that could force their users to drown in water. Which all adds up, as just like Shanks explained in chapter 19, the myth of the origin of Dalfruits is that they are the so-called incarnations of a legendary being known as the Sea Devil, or Umi no Akuma in Japanese, literally the sea itself. But why would the creator of Dalfruits hate their users and punish them by drowning in water? Well, there are several ways you could explain it, but the simplest answer is that this was the intention all along. After all, if Umi is literally the sea, then that means that Dalford users cannot oppose their power. So what if Imu purposely offered the Dalfords to the people of the ancient kingdom, only to cripple them to their powers and making Imu undefeatable to them? And think about it, this would make perfect sense, because regardless of if they may have been artificially created or not, fruits would need a tree to grow from, and what other tree could be better than the Sun Tree Eve? Before Marijua, upon the top of the red line, was the settlement of the Lunaria known as the God Country, one of the biggest members of the ancient kingdom. The Lunaria brought the incredible technology from the moon to this country, which included the research into the bloodline elements, achieving genetic alterations which likely explain how the Lunaria became much more genetically enhanced than the other angel tribes, a technology that Imu may have suggested putting to use alongside the power of the Sun Tree Eve to generate the original Dao fruits, tricking the people of the God Country into making their dreams come true, only to secretly cripple them. Imu doesn't even need to have been a Lunaria, even just one of the many allies of the kingdom would have been enough, given the many allies it had. This likely earned them Imu's trust, leading to making them one of the champions of the 3 ancient weapons, which Imu took advantage to instead betray and backstab this kingdom. In fact, it was likely Imu who secretly gathered the other 19 kings in the first place to declare war on the God Country, and thus put this grand plan into action by usurping power from them. In the current world of One Piece, we know that Imu's subordinates, the celestial dragons, are gods, while those that associate with the Void Century and its kingdom are branded as devils, like the Devils of Ohara or the Devil Child Robin. But during the Void Century, the roles were actually reversed. The people of the God Country were known as gods, whereas instead the rulers of the 20 kingdoms were described by some as literally word by word the devils, and it would thus make sense that above them all would be the Sea Devil, from whom originated fruits that people began to call the fruits of the devil fruits, as it was the king of the devils who created them, thus earning their name. Even Sabo directly referred to the empty throne as the real location of hell in the One Piece world, as witnessing the devilish form of King Imu and all the devil-like transformations of the Gorosei, it was evident to him that all of them were nothing more than devils. It is after all this group that then took over the God Country and instead built Marijua in its place. In fact, this entire scenario fits really well as it perfectly mimics the story of the book of Genesis. Even the devil fruit book in the story was revealed to be called the Book of Genesis, making a clear reference to the tale. As you may likely know, Genesis tells the story of Adam and Eve, who lived in the country of God, the Garden of Eden, where they enjoyed an utopian life. However, they were tempted by the devil to bite into the fruits of the forbidden tree, and as Eve bit into them, they were thus betrayed and exiled from the land of God. Some variations of the tale also add that Lilith, who came before Eve, attempted to disobey the orders of Adam, for which he was branded a demon and exiled. All of this fits really well with the story of the Void Century. The devil Emu tempted and tricked the people of the God Country with the fruits from the devil fruit tree Eve, resulting in them losing their godly status and being expelled from the country. The figure of Nefertari Lili, being the stand-in for Lilith, attempted to stand against Emu but was branded a demon alongside the other people of the God Country and banished in turn. And so with this great elaborate gambit, Emu seized control of the God Country and attained perennial youth to rule the world forevermore. There is also an additional idea I have on top of this, which could maybe make sense or not, but I think it's worth bringing up at least. Originally there was a lot of talk about the possibility of Emu being in reality Nefertari Lili, which was shot down very quickly. But what if this actually could still be the case? What if Emu and Lily weren't the same person, but Emu ended up becoming Lily? A lot of people don't know this fact, but when Doflamingo first talked about the national treasure of Marijua in the Japanese version, he made it very clear that the treasure is actually referring to Emu's very existence directly, with Emu being the living national treasure of Marijua. Doflamingo explained how Emu's very existence could shake the world at its core, something that they did end up very literally doing, but that its existence is the biggest secret the government has. This is why Doflamingo mentioned that they tried persecuting and executing him, but Doflamingo was able to use that to his advantage by blackmailing the government that he would release that information into the world through his underworld connections, which is how he was able to manipulate and blackmail CP0 in his favor during the Dressrosa arc. And furthermore, Doflamingo elaborated that if he had attained the Ope Ope no Mi, then he would have been able to use its power of the personality switching operation, you know, that gag from Punk Hazard about switching bodies, on the national treasure itself to literally become the power that truly rules the world. In other words, Doflamingo wanted to use the personality switching operation to change bodies with Emu directly and become the king of the world, with no one else none the wiser if he would have been able to pull it off. So what I'm getting at is that since Doflamingo brought up both the personality switching operation and the perennial youth operation in the context of Emu, and we have confirmation that Emu used the latter to remain alive all these years, then what if the same is true for the former? What if Emu actually used the personality switching operation on Lily's body, thus becoming Lily directly? It would explain the more slender female silhouette Emu has and why Lily's body literally vanished at Marijua and a bunch of other things. Maybe Lily may even have been the original user of Uranus and that's why Emu took over her body, or perhaps there is some other reason behind it. But regardless whether that's the case or not, it doesn't really matter, because what really matters to us is not if Emu is Lily or what happened to her. What matters is that Emu decided to become king of the world through attaining perennial youth, and to rule the world from the shadows to give people the illusion that they weren't controlled. But because of this, the existence of Emu in the Void Century became myth, and every myth is born upon this world in the form of a mythological devil fruit. So what if, similarly to how someone incarnated Joy Boy during the Void Century, and Emu incarnated the Sea Devil as well, what if, paradoxically, Emu's very existence became a myth again after disappearing from the world that became its own separate devil fruit? But then, who could be the user of this fruit? Which individual is the literal embodiment of everything that Emu stands for? Have you never thought about how weird Blackbeard's fruit is? It's supposedly a Logia, yet somehow Teach said that it doesn't let him turn into the element or dodge any attack like Logia users. Is that because it has special properties, or much more simply because it isn't a Logia. After all, Blackbeard said that the fruit chose him, much in the same way that the Nika fruit may have chosen Luffy after believing in his dream, which it could have only done so if it was a Zoan fruit with a will of its own. This may also be why Blackbeard spoke of people's dreams never ending, because the devil is literally the source of all of people's dreams, the fruits. Devil fruits were even described as having a sense of a gravitational force to them, which makes sense if Imu is meant to be the Earth in this geocentric model, wanting everything to revolve around them. And what did Blackbeard describe his darkness as? A gravitational force, one that draws the entities within devil fruit users back to their origin. Even thematically, this makes sense, as Blackbeard has a lot of associations to the devil, like the 3 skulls in his flag being the symbol for the devil in the One Piece world, or the fact that even the real-life Blackbeard that Oda really admires was described by many to be the son of the devil incarnate. Though I don't think the government has changed the name of many fruits to say the Nika fruit, if a fruit that represented Imu's identity existed, then of course it makes sense that much like Nika, the world government would do everything to hide its name, disguising it as the Logia Yami Yami no Mi. And I mean, why else would Blackbeard literally be able to generate water through an attack he calls Kurouzu, literally black water vortex, which negates the abilities of devil fruit users, because he's the mythical incarnation of Imu, the devil that is able to subdue any devil fruit user with its power of the sea. In fact, even Imu seemed to generate arrows that were made of a dark liquid, as indicated by the droplets it left, or in other words, black water. These two forces are like two sides of the same coin, and now Luffy and Blackbeard, the chosen ones of these fruits, will once more be clashing for the future of the world. Though none the wiser, the real Umi still lurks in this world under the form of Imu. But beyond the gravitational power and everything else, what is it that Blackbeard described his fruit as? Pure darkness. And as we've seen, Imu appears to embody the concept of darkness as well, taking the form of a dark blob that just forms and envelops everything in its darkness. After all, the name Nerona can literally translate to made of darkness, pitch black, and thinking about it, it makes perfect sense, as it further develops the idea that Luffy and Blackbeard, and by extent Joy Boy and Imu, are complete polar opposites. Nika represents pure white, the light of the sun that brings the warmth of the dawn, whereas Imu represents the color black, a cosmic darkness that swallows everything like a black hole. White and black, light and darkness, yin and yang, something that even fits as in Eastern belief. It is believed the 5 elder planets, the Gorosei, revolve around the yin and yang, the black and the white. And since we've seen Imu transform into goofy yet frightening figures as well, what if its parallelisms to Joy Boy are even more similar than we think? Perhaps Imu really is the devil, but not so much in a Lovecraftian form, but more like the devil out of a cartoon, with a devil's tail and encompassing the very primal nightmares of all humans. The same principle as the cartoonish figure that is Joy Boy, but in a much more twisted form. As it was said, Joy Boy is fundamentally the dreams and hopes of people incarnate, bringing laughs to people's faces by acting goofy, whereas Imu is the fears and nightmares of people incarnate, controlling everyone from the shadows. And it is this dynamic of the duality between these two forces of light and darkness that is the key to finally properly understanding what Joy Boy's treasure, the One Piece, actually is. So I'm going to be straight with you from the get-go. I think that the One Piece treasure is Binks' sake, the laugh tale that Roger named the final island after, a story that, if you translate its lyrics, details the events of the Void Century in the form of a song that makes anyone who listens to it laugh in joy. But wait, well, I've brought up this idea in the past. I don't think it's just Binks' sake, or rather we need to ask ourselves what actually really is Binks' sake. Is it really just a song? I mean, if it's a song that has no material form, then how can this song be found as a physical treasure if it's always been with us the entire time? I mentioned in a previous video that perhaps the concept of Binks' sake could be embodied in the form of an actual physical sake waiting at Laugh Tale, so that one day Joy Boy can help deliver that sake just like the song indicates to throw a massive party. But I think some people took that literally as the treasure itself being the sake itself, but I feel the sake has to be more of a symbolic complimentary thing, as I mentioned in that video. After all, why would Roger laugh at just a bottle? And didn't Roger describe the actual treasure as a laugh tale, a funny story that causes people to laugh? So it would make sense the One Piece treasure itself is Binks' sake, but it has to be something more specific than just a song. It has to be an actual physical treasure. Whitebeard even described the One Piece treasure as something capable of turning the world upside down. However, this is a term that is often mistranslated to meaning a big war or conflict within the community, but actually the Japanese words used here more accurately translate to a social change, meaning that the One Piece is something that when spread won't necessarily cause a big war. That's likely going to be before the treasure is found, as Oda has actually confirmed in an interview several times, but rather could change the future of the people of the world for the better. The One Piece is something that can change society itself. But then, what kind of treasure could even do that? What is the treasure Roger left to at the final island? And see, this is where it comes full circle, because Joy Boy is the living embodiment of Binks' sake. I mean, why else would Luffy, when transformed into Nika, start singing lyrics from Binks' sake? Why else is he mentioning the dawn of the world in his sneak attacks, if not for the fact that it's part of the lyrics of Binks' sake? Why else is he laughing all the time, if not for the fact that laughter is the main chorus of Binks' sake? And why else is the rhythm of the drums of liberation the same as Binks' sake? Don do to to, yo ho ho ho. Because Nika is literally the personification of this song, of this laugh tale. But why? Why is Luffy literally a walking One Piece? And what really is Binks' sake? Is it really just a song? But as I said, if it's a song, then we already have it. What else could be waiting at Laugh Tale? What is the physical treasure that Roger laughed to that is the One Piece? Is it a title or an epithet? No, it's a lot simpler than that. Joy Boy is a superhero nickname. Much like Superman, or more literally Superboy, and other superheroes like Astro Boy, or even the in-world Sora Warrior of the Sea, Nika is a comic book superhero, the warrior of liberation, a boy whose superpower is to deliver joy to people. After all, Luffy has eaten a mythical type fruit, meaning that Nika is a mythical character. Mythical fruits allow their users to turn into creatures that never really existed, fantastical beasts, or in other words, the sun god Nika is a fictional character, the fictional comic book superhero Joy Boy, the warrior of liberation. Now let me be very clear, I'm not saying that there wasn't an actual Joy Boy during the Void Century, especially considering that Zunisha was said to personally know Joy Boy in the past, and there's the poneglyph at Fishman Island to Joy Boy's name. I agree that a Joy Boy did exist during the Void Century, but that was simply the title given to the first user of the fruit who incarnated the fictional character of Nika. There's a misconception that Joy Boy was the actual name of the person in the Void Century, but we now know that it was more of a title, their actual real name still unknown. After all, Oden mentioned that a new Joy Boy would appear, and Zunisha referred to Luffy as a Joy Boy as well, separate to the Joy Boy of the Void Century, so it's a title that extends to anyone who ate the fruit, both the first user from the Void Century that the Gorosei mentioned, and now the second user in the present, Luffy himself. In other words, Nika, the Warrior of Liberation, was a fictional superhero character from a comic book story, much like, for example, Sora, Warrior of the Sea. Nika's story was so goofy, funny, and laugh-inducing that it brought liberation to the people of the Void Century, to the point some began to venerate the figure of Nika like that of a god, almost kinda in the same way that One Piece fans venerate this series like a cult, giving praise to Goda and all that. The slaves of the Void Century were suffering so desperately that they wished that somehow Nika could be real, and thus from that dream the Hito Itonomi model Nika was born. As Who's Who said, people dreamed him up. After all, when we are told about how Dal fruits were born out of people's wishes and dreams, the prime example was that of Nika, stating that no matter how much the government tries to erase it, as long as people continue to wish for him to exist, Nika's existence will never cease to be. All things that are wished for will be born upon this world. That's how Dal fruits are born. And so the Hito Itonomi model Nika was incarnated, allowing whoever ate it to become the robbery superhero of Nika in real life. And the person who ate it during the Void Century came to be known by the superhero nickname of Joy Boy, because they became the superhero Nika incarnate. We even saw how characters like Kuma wanted to become a superhero like Nika, and it's been stated how his tribe were punished for that very same reason, indicating that the first user of the fruit may even have been a buccaneer, which would explain the large hat found in Marijois, one that perfectly suits the dimensions of a buccaneer, who would have been the first Joy Boy of the Void Century. This first Joy Boy would attempt to change the world, but would eventually be killed by the government, causing the fruit to go back into circulation. However, the fruit would elude others for 800 years until it finally found and chose a new user it would believe in, a young boy who shared its silly dream of connecting the whole world together in a massive party. After all, Luffy mentioned how he told Shanks about the goal at the end of his dream, what I believe to throw the biggest party in the world, and if the fruit does have a will of its own, then perhaps witnessing Luffy's declaration in its vicinity just right next to Shanks within that box, it influenced it to choose Luffy as its new user and drew Luffy towards the fruit to eat it. This young boy would awaken the fruit once more to become the new Joy Boy of the present, inheriting the superhero's nickname once more. Nika is a fictional cartoon superhero who came to be venerated like a god and became incarnated through a mythical Dal fruit, one eaten by users who inherited the superhero title of Joy Boy. But then, what if the same happened with Imu as well? Much like Joy Boy, Imu appears to be very cartoonish in their transformations, so what if Nerona Imu was a regular human king from the Void Century who, much like the first user of the Nika fruit, the Joy Boy of the Void Century, became the form incarnate of the Sea Devil? What if the Sea Devil is in reality the cartoonish villain of Nika's comic, the antagonist and nemesis of Nika, a cartoonish yet frightening devilish creature that, much like Nika, takes on cartoonish transformations, but represents the darkness and fears of humanity? Because Nika itself, incarnated through the users who call themselves Joy Boy, is a fictional cartoon character, literally something straight out of a comic strip as Kaido described it, because he literally came from an actual comic. This is why the Joy Boy users are so cartoonish when they fight, because the original story is a funny comic about how the superhero Nika aimed to deliver the proverbial Binks Sasake to unify the world in a massive party, as evidenced by the fact that the pose of Nika and the sound of the drums of liberation is meant to represent a party, with the dance even being used as actual party dancing. In fact, you could see the song of Binks Sasaki itself as being like the theme song of the Joy Boy cartoon, the story made in the form of a song, the equivalent of We Are, even if you want, a song that tells the exploits of the superhero in an attempt to deliver laughter to all in the world. Because after all, think about it. What is it that happens when you read One Piece and see Luffy transforming into Year 5th and being silly and wacky? What is the emotion that is instilled in you when seeing Joy Boy in action? we laugh. It's funny, wacky, and silly in ways that it uncontrollably makes us laugh, just like the Roger pirates did. Roger referred to the One Piece treasure as being associated to Joy Boy and described it as a warai banashi in Japanese, a word that literally translates to laugh tale, hence why he cheekily gave the island the name of Laugh Tale, because that's the treasure it hid. When you think about it, the One Piece treasure itself is the laugh tale of Nika, the manga version of Bing Sasaki, the original comic of Nika that inspired the people of the Void Century to change the world, and thus left it behind in hopes that someone would inherit their ideals in the future, as symbolized in the book itself. As the Gorosei explained, Nika was a superhero made of rubber whose power was to bring laughter and smiles to people's faces by acting silly and ridiculous, to the point that the fruit came to be known as the most ridiculous and silly power there is, making cartoons into reality. And we saw this in action when Nika's silly battles made Roger and his crew laugh, just as we do when we see Gear 5th in action in the story itself. This is likely why Roger mentioned that he wished he had been born in Joy Boy's era, but perhaps this wasn't necessarily referring to the Joy Boy of the Void Century, but may even have been referring to the Joy Boy of the present, Luffy. Just like Roger lamented several times about having to die so early, he likely realized that the fruit had yet to choose a new user who could make its dream come true around the same time the ancient weapons would be born. And Roger wished he had been born in Luffy's era to see him in action transformed as Joy Boy, to see the real-life version in action of the fictional story that made him laugh so much. Perhaps that is why Roger was too early, because he wished he could have lived long enough to see Luffy transformed in action and becoming Joy Boy. But then, what's the point of the One Piece being Bing Sasaki? How can a manga change the world? Well, to answer that question, we only need to take a look at the cover of Volume 1, where if we simply zoom out, we can see the One Piece itself, the manga. Because to ask how One Piece can change the world, you need to ask yourself this first. How has One Piece changed your own world? At first glance, One Piece seems to be a comic that is silly and ridiculous. I mean, look at those exaggerated designs and comical art style. It seems like a goofy laugh tale whose purpose is to only draw laughter out of you. But then you start reading it and realize how it's so much more than that. It's a profound story, one that tackles very serious social and existential issues that plague the communities of our world. Yet it manages to explore such profound themes while still being a silly pirate story that is meant to make you laugh. It's one that teaches you to become a better person and to share that joy with other people. And thanks to that, many people who have read One Piece have managed to become better people. I won't deny that if it wasn't for One Piece, I likely would have gone down a very dark path in my life, rather than wanting to share that joy with others. It teaches many of us to throw away things like hatred and racism, discrimination, segregation, and fear, to instead embrace joy, laughter, unity, and equality, to convince the people from the world to all come together to just party and share life together. Maybe the same could be said of the in-world One Piece story, Bing Sasaki. It likely tells the tragic story of the Void Century, but romanticizes it in a goofy way with a cartoon style that makes it more appealing to those who read it. I mean, how can we change the world? There's only so much we can do, but realistically the ones that can change the world are future generations, our children, a theme that has been established even within the story of One Piece itself. It is important that we educate future children to think freely, to think for themselves, and to overcome their fears to instead share that equality, love, and joy with others. And while education can help do that, of course, a story will be able to do that even better. It is a more effective form of education, as those who become enamored with this world and story will want to make such values a reality in their own lives. And that's how the One Piece treasure will change the history of the One Piece world. If the story of Bing Sasaki is delivered to all across the world, future children who will grow up with it will not only understand the truth of the world, but will want to embrace that freedom and joy this story transmits, to join together in party rather than war. And this is exactly where Emu matches the parallel opposite of Joy Boy. We've seen Emu doing the complete opposite by creating their own opposite of the One Piece, the comic of Sora, the Warrior of the Sea. A story that brainwashes children into believing the undisputed might and power of the world government, with Sora being literally the opposite of the Warrior of Liberation, the Warrior of the Sea, literally embodying propaganda of the sea Emu themselves. But on the other hand, the One Piece is a story that tells the truth of history and the ideals of the people of the ancient kingdom, but romanticizes it in a goofy and entertaining way that those themes can hit much more profoundly to future generations, much like the One Piece manga has done in our world as well. Even if you don't fully understand the depth of the themes the story presents or aren't as interested in them, One Piece will still share its infectious joy with you. As you see this stretchy, rubbery boy go on his silly adventures and having fun, it brings a smile on your face and liberates you from the worries and pains of your life. Luffy, having now become Joy Boy through his fruit, makes his presence throughout the One Piece manga just like that of the in-world Bing Sasake, and through that story he will bring laughter and joy to all the people in the world. Now, I'm not saying that Oda is going to break the fourth wall and self-insert himself into the story as the writer or anything, but rather that the One Piece treasure being a manga is a symbolic representation of how important the manga itself is to all those of us who read it to get to this point. The real treasure is so much more than the friends we made along the way. It's the actual journey, the adventure, the manga that we took to find the One Piece, only to realize that it was literally in front of our eyes all along. It was the very experience, all the memories, all the hype moments, all the bittersweet moments, all that we have shared with this community, all the joy, the tears, and the laughter that this silly story about a robbery boy has given us. And that is exactly what the real One Piece treasure is all about. It's the very story that has inspired us to keep on living, to keep on loving, and to keep sharing the joy with the whole world. There is no bigger treasure than the very story that brings us all together as One Piece. However, this is good and all, but this is all simply a theory. How can I stand behind this theory without proving that it could become reality? Could a fictional figure really inspire people of an ancient kingdom so much to bring people from all over the world to simply party together? So to prove my theory, I decide to do just that, in real life. 2 years ago, when I published the first episode of this massive mega theory series and said that Luffy's true dream is to throw the biggest party in the world, I mentioned how much like Luffy, I also had a dream of my own. To throw the biggest One Piece party in the world. And with the help of my friends, we finally made it a reality. Luffy, our Joy Boy, inspired us to make his dream come true by throwing together the biggest party the One Piece community has ever seen. We all sang Bing Sasake together, party together, and share our united joy for this beautiful, ever-wondering, never-ending laugh tale. The story that is the One Piece.